Hi everyone, my name is Trish Werner. I'm on the PTA here at JLE, and I'm also a member of the school's garden committee. The school garden committee has been talking this year about creating a school garden program here at JLE, and so we wanted to create this slideshow to give you more information about what we've been thinking about and our plan to make this a reality here at JLE. So this is our vision. We want to create a robust and sustainable garden program here at JLE where students can learn about food systems, habitats, environmentally sustainable farming practices, cooking, preserving foods, seed gathering, propagation, pollination, and more. And we want them to be able to share these ideas with their families and the community. So this slide gives you more detail about what we think this garden program can look like. Our hope is that starting next year and into the next years after that, each student would be receiving 2 to 4 garden lessons each month, taught by a separate garden educator. These lessons will include a lot of seasonal garden rituals that all students will work on every year. That would be things like seed saving, planting cover crops, mulching, composting, doing a lot of seed sowing and planting starts, and also doing a lot of food tastings and preserving the food that they're growing in the garden. But we also want students to be able to focus deeper on other garden themes throughout their years. So we thought that the kindergartners could focus on more of an introduction to the garden. This is where they get introduced to the themes that they'll be working on. We thought the first graders could focus in on seeds and focusing on how seeds work, how they grow, how they spread, and all the different parts of the plants and stuff like that. We thought the second graders could focus on pollinators and thriving habitats. This is where they focus in not only on pollinator species, but other beneficial species in the garden and the types of habitats that are required to help them thrive. Third grade could focus on becoming soil scientists. This is where they would learn about the different components that create a healthy and thriving soil system. We thought the fourth graders could continue this work, really focusing on decomposers and composting, where there could be like an intense focus on worms and vermicomposting. And then fifth graders could focus deeply on renewable resources. So this would be where they really start diving into some really important permaculture practices and principles, like using and valuing renewable resources and catching and storing energy. And they could apply these principles to rain and soil and sunlight and seeds and stuff like that. The great thing about this type of curriculum is that it could potentially cover about 50% of all of the next generation science standards that our students should be learning. We also thought that we could create a few really important community celebrations that would happen that would tie our garden into the community. So we thought in the fall we could have a harvest festival where we focus on sort of like a bite of the garden event where different classes take a crop from the garden and they create a recipe that they can share little bites of with the families that come to the event. So for example, one class might focus on making salsa from the tomatoes, one class might focus on making like little miniature pumpkin pie bites from the pumpkins, things like that. And then the families who show up could walk around and get little bites of the garden. We thought in the spring we could do an Earth Day celebration where different classes focus on creating a grade level themed exhibition booth, so like an informational table about all the stuff that they've been learning in their particular area of focus. So that's what we think this garden program could look like, and now let's talk about what our plan is to actually make this a reality here at JLE. So our plan has two parts to it. The first is to design a new and improved garden space that can facilitate the exploration of all of these areas of focus. And then the second part is raising money to fund a part-time garden educator so that it's not the classroom teachers that need to make this happen. We want to actually have someone who can lead these lessons who are separate from the classroom teachers. This is what our current garden space looks like. In the back of this photo, you'll see those 2 sets of double doors, and those are the double doors that are closest to the cafeteria. This courtyard garden is in between the 2 main hallways, and you'll notice that there's already some raised beds and some benches. You'll also notice a giant activity table that we want to repurpose and use as well. Some of these raised beds are rather old. We want to keep the good ones, the really tall ones that are 4x4x2, and then get rid of some of the older ones that are not as in good shape. So this is a drawing of what we think the garden space could look like. The yellow arrows are pointing to the current raised beds that we want to keep. They're 4x4x2, and we thought those could be on both ends of the garden. But we want to build 8 new galvanized steel raised beds in the center between those two. And the galvanized steel beds should last a lot longer and be more durable. We also want to put in a large teepee structure that the kids could climb in. This will be a place where they can plant sugar snap peas and other types of pea varieties, and those will be available for them to harvest throughout the spring. Around the edges of the garden, we want to focus on planting more perennials, more edible perennials. For example, this first circled area is where we want to plant some grape trellises. That's along the east side of the courtyard. We think we could probably fit 5 or 6 grapevines in there with strawberries and pumpkins and other plants underneath. The grapes ripen in the fall and are ready to pick when the kids come back to school. We also want to plant on the right-hand side of that a trellis for some fall ripening raspberries that'll be ready also when the kids come back to school in the fall. Along the windows that face the cafeteria, we want to plant a few dwarf fruit trees, maybe an apple and a peach, and create a fruit tree guild with companion plantings underneath them. We want to leave a space on the west side of the courtyard to create a Three Sisters garden that includes popping corn that the students could pop in the fall, also squash and beans. We want to create a space where we can plant a lot of pollinator plants and flowers, a lot of native perennials, some sensory garden elements, and then maybe creating an alcove with a bench for seating. This slide shows you some different structures we want to put in place. So we want to buy a new shed, a new garden shed to put all of our tools in. You'll notice in the garden that's there right now that there's probably 6 or 8 benches. We want to repaint those and seal them and place them in various spots around the garden so that people can sit and admire the garden. We also want to build a 3-bin compost system on the east-facing wall so that students could, when they're studying compost and soil sciences, they can use that compost system. You'll also notice if you look in the courtyard right now that there are 2 pine trees right in the middle, and you'll also notice that there's a lot of tree stumps used for seating. We think this would be a perfect area for an outdoor classroom, so we've included that in our design as well. So on the right-hand side of this design, where all those arrows are pointing, we want to take all of those tree stumps, just chop off a little bit of the top, paint them, reseal them so that they'll be good seats for students to use, and we could gather them underneath those 2 trees. We also want to create a small kiosk outside underneath those trees where we could build a whiteboard, a lockable whiteboard kiosk, so that when garden lessons are happening in the garden, there's a board to write on. We also want to take that large activity table that's currently placed over by the raised beds and move it over close to the outdoor classroom and use that as a large gathering space for doing various activities. And then we also want to put up some sunshades to create more of a rain canopy underneath those 2 pine trees. So hopefully we can get some tree trimmers in there. They can raise the limbs of the trees, kind of create some more space, and we can install some rain canopies to create more of a year-round space that kids could use even when it's raining outside. We have some other ideas as well. We want to include a weather station for students to study the weather. We want to include a mason bee hotel for when students are studying different garden species. We'd like to include some magnifying stations with magnifying glass posts for students studying various things in the garden. And then a lot of different types of garden signs so that students and families can learn from the garden even when there's no actual lessons happening in the garden. We are starting to work on the garden right now. We're going to be working on these different raised beds and creating some gravel pathways this Saturday on February 18th at 10 a.m. and we could use some people to help with that. We're also going to be working Saturday, March 4th, having a garden work party out there at 10 a.m. And we're hoping to get all of the raised beds installed by March 4th so that students can start planting in them, and then we can start working on the other spaces like the garden classroom and things like that. So these are the first 2 garden parties that we're hoping some people can show up and lend a hand to help create this space. We're also working on some fundraising ideas so that we can raise the money needed to get this program off the ground. We think that it'll take about $2,000 to create all of these garden elements to actually build this garden space based on that design. And we currently have $1,600 already in our garden budget to use. We just applied for a $5,000 Growing Gardens grant that we're confident about receiving, and those funds will be available at the end of February this month. We're also applying for a Whole Kids grant, which is worth $3,000. We're applying for that right now, and the funds should be available in September. So there's some other things that we're hoping to raise, other ideas we have for doing some fundraising. We want to do a direct fundraising mailer to all households and businesses in the Jason Lee boundary area, not just the families here at Jason Lee. We're also thinking about doing some sort of garden screen printing t-shirt that students can make and we could sell. We've also been talking about doing a milkweed fundraiser where we either sell milkweed seeds or milkweed plants, which are important for butterflies, and we're also open to other ideas. So these are the different things we're going to try to help raise money, not only to make these improvements to the garden, but also to fund a garden coordinator in the fall. Starting next week, we're going to start doing some seed sowing and planting with the students at school. Every other week, I'm going to go into the school to do indoor and outdoor seed starting. We're going to bring in some grow lights and some grow mats, and students are going to start planting some tomatoes, peppers, and tomatillos and stuff like that. And then every other week, we're going to go back and students are going to start planting stuff not only inside with the indoor grow lights, but also out in the garden. They're going to be starting a lot of indoor or outdoor seeds starting right after March 6th. So that's why we need to make sure those raised beds go in pretty quickly. And they'll be doing a lot of this planting every other week through the end of May. That's our current plan. We just want to make sure that you guys all knew about what we're trying to do, and then go ahead and read through the newsletter to get more information about how you can help make this happen.